welcome to the Experience Podcast. I am a multi-dimensional being having a human experience. My name is Neil Miller, and joining me today is...
I am Lyle.
And I'm Dennis.
And so to get started, could you just explain some of your backstory and kind of like how you grew up and kind of just give kind of a background for the viewers that are listening.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Amish culture, which I'm very grateful for actually. As the years pass, I'm more and more grateful for that because of the things that I was instilled from the core, I guess. And in that culture, basically, if you're not aware, it's very non-traditional and they drive horse and buggy. They try not to use any technology or be connected to the world. Is a lot of how they operate. Not to say that they don't have a few of those things for business and stuff like that. But grew up, and then 16 you go through this what they call Rumspringa is the common word for it, which basically translates into running around. But basically you kind of express yourself and figure out what you want to do. Through that, so I've had multiple different jobs in different industries, and I was just never really happy.
So what was like the first kind of thing that you kind of got into, like your initial job that you first did?
My first initial job was actually at a hardware store, which now I look back and I'm very appreciative of that because of all the things I learned in that. Having people come in and say, I have this issue and it needs to do this, and you having to work through that and figure that out in whatever situation, whether that was plumbing or whatever, really helped me in so many ways, and also gave me this ability and this thing that now really is one of the reasons I feel like able to start a business, in the sense of you can really do anything, even if you don't know or have the knowledge.
Sure.
You just got to seek the knowledge and ask and do it and get experience and then learn from that.
Sure. So it sounds like it was pretty faceted at that hardware store,
Yeah, and it was a small town hardware, so you walked in, and you might not have an idea, like you knew what you wanted to do, but you didn't know what you needed to do that, and that's we would help people with that. So it's the small town feel, the small town help that you don't get at big box stores like Lowe's, Menards, stuff like that.
Sure.
And it's something that I really appreciate and something that now has really translated into my business, which is really cool to see.
Okay.
So you were solving problems for people?
Basically, solving problems for people, and connecting them with the right resources, information, products, basically, amongst other things, making the store run and stuff like that. It was really, now I look back, in the moment I was 16, 17, I didn't care about that, but now I look back and really realize how much that affected me for the rest of my life, really. So,
wow.
Between that and then also growing up on a farm without access to technology and things, one of the biggest things I remember, I'm thankful for my dad for, is he would always say, in some sense, maybe not these exact words, but he would always tell us that, if it's been done, then you can do it, even if you don't know, how to do it. You just either try it, or you ask somebody that has, and then and that is a big cornerstone of how I learn now, and is, with mentors, with people that have done things that I haven't, or been in situations, and then the first-hand experience, like not being afraid to try something. Like, if it's a hardware part, like, what's going to happen? You're going to ruin it, and then you can just buy another one. Like, it's such a thing that doesn't really allow. I don't allow myself to stop it. And then, you can seek the information out basically anywhere. So he would always like push us to that. Yeah, you can do it, and not be afraid of that. So now, like, I just, that's not a part of my being, which is I feel like a big hurdle with a lot of people is, oh, I don't know how to do that, so I'm not going to do it.
Sure. So, do you feel like growing up Amish, do you feel like your dad has supported you in everything that you've done?
Like in my up to now?
Yes.
Overall, yes. I mean, there's obviously not being Amish. My parents want me to follow that religion and stuff
Sure.
like that. I think really what I see is, and my relationship with my parents is as long as I'm a good person, I think that's the main thing. Obviously when I was younger, they pushed me or encouraged me, would talk to me about, joining the church and being Amish and following that lifestyle. And from a parent standpoint, I totally get that. But overall, we have a really good relationship, I feel like, and they're not there necessarily beside me cheering me on, but they're also not
They're not
being negative or trying to be like, oh, you shouldn't do that or this or that.
It's a mutual respect.
It is anymore. Sure. It really is.
Fantastic.
And I greatly appreciate that from them for that. Because through my early 20s and late teens, I don't feel like I have much respect for them in just the sense of that, because a room spring, and I mean, all I lived for at that point, well, one of the main things was just the next weekend, and getting out there and partying and having fun with friends.
Sure. So you mentioned like your dad had this insight about like if things were done, like they could be done, or like because somebody already did it. So what was your outlook on that time with things that haven't been done, like about trying brand new things? How did you perceive that at that time?
I've always been curious, right? And I like seeking things out and figuring things out and using my hands and my mind and solving things. At that time, if I look back, I would say I pushed back against that because as a kid growing up on a farm, my mindset back then, from what I remember, was I have it so much harder than anybody else or any of my friends, right? And I think that's probably any kid's kind of mindset. That
Sure.
So I did definitely push back on that. And at that point, I never thought of, my mindset's completely different than it is now. And then, yeah, and so I guess that's...
Okay.
So you went from Ace Hardware, and then what other things or industry did you work in, or what did you do? Or
so it's very kind of interesting because from there I went to well drilling, was there, and then went to the RV industry because of money. As a young kid, you chase that more. That's usually
Sure.
more what you respond to than
What
other
period of
things.
time were you working on the well drilling?
From like 18, 19, when it was the age 18 to 19,
So
and then
pretty much like a year.
yeah, it was. I think it was a year and a half.
Okay.
I think it was a year and a half. I'd have to go back, but and then I went to RV, and then of course I switched. One was just environment, and then I went to different RV, and then switched again for more money and stuff like that. Through that though, I think a key thing in my journey has been some of the network marketing experiences I've had. Have I made a lot of money? No, I haven't. I made some that I've been introduced to some incredible products, some that I still use today. Like that's the one thing about that industry is there's some incredible products.
What products do you still use currently that you kind of learned through that process?
So the one particularly is Protandim. So there's this company called LifeVantage, and there's Protandim, which is something you intake, and then they have this skin cream that is literally the best thing for poison ivy for me. Like it has worked incredible, and sunburns. Like it's incredible. And then I think the other stuff isn't necessarily as much products as just the education of the good and bad of products and ingredients and things like that. Because a lot of that industry is usually a lot more natural focused, I would say, in general, for if they have a product. And then also I gained so many friends and mentors and people all around the US. And because of that is some of the books initial books that I read that really opened my mind up to the possibilities of things. And the first and biggest one was The Magic of Thinking Big. If you guys haven't read that book, it's incredible. And then there's a whole list of other things. Jim Rohn is very network marketing.
The Seasons of Life.
Yeah, but there's so much value and so many incredible things in his teachings that are just good for life, rather than just network marketing specific and business. And through that, I always kind of wanted my own business, my own thing.
Sure.
I never knew what that would be, and that's why I tried a lot of different things. Moving forward, RV was actually helped a friend build a scrapping business, and started a insurance company with a friend, an agency, and learned a lot through those things. A lot of good things, some things to really watch out for, because those things ultimately failed. The one became very successful and then ultimately failed. The other one kind of failed because of just some things that were kind of out of my control, but I saw very early that's not what I wanted to be a part of.
Sure.
But from those, I was always looking for something, right?
And you were always learning too.
Always learning. One of the things that is huge for me, and I probably don't do as much as I used to, but is to take 15 minutes out of every day for yourself, for growth for yourself, whether that is just you sitting and just not being connected to anything, or it's you actually engaging in a book, in a YouTube video, in a podcast, something that is expanding your kind of your way of thinking, or just your mindset. Doesn't mean that you have to be like that. It's just being exposed outside of your little world, right?
Right.
Self-growth.
Yeah, self-growth, and that has really been a huge factor, for sure.
So when did that 15 minutes a day, when did you kind of start incorporating that?
That was, I would say, it was in my early 20s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Did a lot of, when I look back, I started doing that, but I didn't actually use a lot of that until a few years later, right? that I started doing that for self-growth, because my personality and how I am is, when I get in a group of people, I just want to leave. Like, I know. So one-on-one, I really enjoy a lot, right? Even if it's everybody I know, I'm an introvert in that setting. So for me, the self-growth that's what spurred that.
Sure.
I grew huge as far as my confidence, and just everything grew a lot in that. And then I also found through that like some things, like, I'm just never going to change, because that's just who I am. So I'm always going to have those thoughts and feelings, but it's figuring out how to use that to benefit, basically, and how to not let that control my life and my experience.
Sure. Essentially navigate when those thoughts and feelings come up, being able to navigate the situation you're in without having those thoughts and emotions like have an effect on the situation. You feel them, but you're able to navigate the situation rather than having them kind of control the situation. Yeah. In a sense.
Yes. One of the biggest things I've heard and practiced and been taught is acknowledging that, but letting those negative or those self-deprecating or whatever those thoughts are, taking that time and shrinking them down. So basically, when you have a negative thought, or you have something that you don't like or don't want, acknowledging that and feeling that, but instead of 5 minutes, try to make so it's only 4 minutes that you're spending on that. So and then finding your whatever that is. Like, some people, Mel Robbins has a really fantastic where you count down from 5, count backwards down, to get yourself out of that, or whatever. Is have something that you can immediately trigger that to kind of shake that, but yeah, if you can really like shrink down that time that you're in that space, it's incredible what happens.
That's interesting. I want to go back to what you said earlier about you started reading 15 minutes a day, and that was how many years ago? Like 10 years ago or something?
Yeah.
And you said you didn't see the results until
a few years later.
So, I mean, for anybody that's watching, they're like 10 years. I mean, do you feel it was important, like those 15 minutes a day? Like, what is the value that you got? How do you see those 15 minutes a day? How has that impacted up until this point? Like, even if, so you're just saying you didn't see the results right away.
Yeah. Well, and from the outward looking in,
Sure.
You don't see the results. I think, obviously things are changing, but I think there's a lot of different levels there. So we'll go into a couple of them, and the one I think is, now that we have these, we're so connected, we're so like always on, right? Like, I don't feel like that was initially how we were built to be, like always on devices.
I
things
totally
like that.
agree.
So I think one of the key things in that 15 minutes is you're giving yourself that every day, and no matter what you have going on in life, whether you have kids or whatever it is, give yourself that, because then it's, and however you do that, if you have to wake up 15 minutes earlier, then do that. Like, or if you have to stay up 15 minutes later after everybody's gone to bed, or whatever that is, like, find that, because when you commit to yourself to take just 15 minutes, or any kind of time, right? That's a huge, it's huge for yourself, and you don't, I don't know. I get a lot of peace, and anymore it's not so much reading as sometimes it's just completely like shutting everything off and just sitting with myself in the environment I'm in, wherever that's at, and just, some people, because we're so always on, like, don't know how to do that anymore. So that's kind of one facet there. And I kind of went on a tangent there, so my mind's not going that way. But um, I think it's not the one thing I've come to realize is it's not a destination, right? It's
Sure.
it's every day, every part of your journey, and there's different parts every year, whatever that is we always, just how we're created and our minds are, we always, for me, I always have to work every day, every week to better myself, because when you're working like that, it might be like this, and then you have a kind of that moment that you're, oh wow. But if you're not, you're actually receding. You're not just staying on a level,
Sure.
just going along, because of just how we're built. I feel like you recede. So if you're not doing something to build yourself in some way, and I think that's the important side of that. It's not so much the exact content that you consume, it's that you take time for yourself and that you have a growth mindset for yourself.
So, and with that, like, I feel like it creates like a self-discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And like with that self-discipline, now you create kind of a willpower within yourself that, like, hey, like these 15 minutes, these are for me, like I'm gonna take this time because I know it's important. And now that you kind of create that self-discipline, even so you may just, sit there and meditate or basically not intake anything, and but that self-discipline is going to be in your life more than in just those 15 minutes.
Absolutely.
Like that self-discipline will go to other areas of your life where you will now incorporate it.
I totally agree with that, and I think that's very powerful, because the self-discipline it always looks like a huge mountain, and I think this goes in, I talk about this in anything that I've done, right? Everything looks so big and it's so unachievable, but then when you do it, you look back and go, oh, that wasn't that bad, right? Because we build it up so much, and whatever that is. Going back to the self-discipline, I now see that translating into other areas of my life. Like, I run a lot, or when I'm not injured, and I've really come to enjoy that the last like 6 years. And I used to like do 3 or 4 times a week, like whatever. A couple months ago, or twice this year, I've ran every day for 2 months straight, and then got sidetracked because of injuries or whatever it was. And that's actually way easier once you get into that groove, into that habit, whatever you want to call it. It's way easier than to running 3 or 4 times a week, because and so here was what I held myself to, at least a mile a day, no matter what. So when you do that, I mean, there's days I got home at 11:30, I didn't want to do it. But guess what? you 10 minutes is what it takes to do it. 15 minutes if you want. Like,
sure,
it's not about like trying to do it as fast as you can. It's all about just that self-discipline, about making you do something to better yourself, and then afterwards you always feel way better.
And
I mean, yeah, it's
like,
incredible.
Like how you were saying about like how we really like we want to just blow things up, and like we look at situations and we're like, holy crap, like this is a big situation, like how are we going to begin to navigate it? And with that self-discipline, if we really want to simplify it, it can be as simple as brushing your teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Waking up every day and brushing your teeth, and maybe before you go to bed, you're creating that habit, and that's time that you've taken for yourself to now improve your teeth for the next day, or and that's like, it's really simple. It can be as simple as that, and that can give you this like a confidence boost.
So, do you guys think self-discipline is like a muscle? Kind of.
Absolutely, I think so. And I think back to your point of the simplicity, I think we as humans make it a lot harder than it is. And I think when you just focus on just doing it or just starting it, and just keeping it simple, the basics, then you will build on that, right? But if you when we sit there and we go, man, I want to do this, I want to do it every day, but then our mind immediately puts all these things in or what these barriers could be, and before long your mind's built a mountain and you can't see that.
Right.
If you just, this happens, not daily, but there's moments where this happens. Even
Sure.
when I am doing it 2 months in, I just don't, and I sit there for 15 minutes, like tell myself, it's snowing or raining or whatever, and it's windy, and like I'm gonna slip or this, whatever that is, right? But then when I go out there and do it, and then come back and I go, man, that was awesome.
Well,
Sure.
and it's also like you were saying, like you maybe contemplated it for 15 minutes. In those 15 minutes, you could have already completed it and felt better after the fact. And those thoughts or emotions that you're feeling wouldn't even pertain to the situation because you're in the moment kind of doing it.
Yeah, I think all that is definitely muscle. Just like anything else, whether it's physical, I think the mental is a muscle in pretty much every level there. And I don't know all the science and stuff, but there is a lot of science and studies behind it, where when you use different parts of the brain and you use it consistently, how the brain's, I might be saying this wrong, but how your brain looks different after you've been practicing different things that would cause a different part of your brain to, expand.
It creates new neural pathways.
Yeah, and when they do a CAT scan or something like that, they can really see a difference in your mind, and that's very to that. I mean, there's from my own experience, it's absolutely muscle that you build, and then it's also, from the scientific side, it's definitely something you build. And it just comes back to like working out, or if I want to get this arm bigger, right? Like I'm gonna do things with weight to get this arm bigger. But as soon as I stop, my arm just doesn't stay right there. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think that's how our mind works also.
That's a pretty fascinating analogy. I haven't quite heard it said like that, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
Either you're growing or you're dying.
Yeah.
Or you're going backwards.
Essentially,
I've heard it said by Jonathan England. He talks about how the secret to success is momentum, and the secret to failure is momentum.
It's interesting.
It's about just getting that momentum going in the direction that you kind of want to get it going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, both ways are gonna feel like you have a lot of momentum towards it. So I can definitely understand that for sure. And no matter, yeah, it's very interesting. And
so like you were in the RVs, and then after you were out of the RV factories, what was kind of your next outlet, or what was kind of your next facet after that?
So the reason I left was to help with the scrapping business, the recycling business. And
so was that built before you went into the RVs? Was that or did that kind of come into being while you were still working there?
That came into being while I was still working there. Is actually a co-worker how I got connected with that. And then I was in that for a few years, and then came back to the RV industry. I really kind of got lost in a few years of I don't know, just a journey, a period of time, I guess, in my life that I look back and go, ooh. But we have those, and it's okay to acknowledge those and learn from those or grow from those. It's hard for me not to get down on myself about that period of time, but acknowledging that and looking to where that took me, right? Because it's always just a step.
Sure.
And then coming out of that, I really was set on some things I didn't want because of that, which then also gives you more momentum and push towards what. So from that, I think then I went back with the scrapping for a little bit, and then I went to a metal fabrication shop. And from that is when then I broke my phone, and that's how I ended up starting that business. Was literally I broke my phone, called around. I've always fixed my own stuff. Like
Okay.
that's just, I really enjoy that. I do that on the side. Like I've always done that on the side, basically.
Sure.
Fixing vehicles, whatever it is. And called around to have it fixed. Ooh, that's a lot. Now I know it wasn't a lot, but my mindset was, well, I can get this part, and the YouTube video says it's this easy. It's not. I messed up the first part because they don't tell you all the little key things, just the overview, right? But because of that, then friends reached out, and then it really, like, that happened in like September, like August or September 15. And then like I had a couple friends, and I was like, ooh, and then there's actually a key person that worked at his family had a little wireless shop kind of in Syracuse, New. And he's like, hey, the repair side, like we've tried it. There's definitely a need out there, but nothing has worked out. So I started doing it in their shop, and then put a Facebook post out there. Hey, if I learn this, would anybody, would there be a need? And the response I got was just, wow. And then, so I really dove into learning that trade and did it part-time until spring of 2017. And then I moved, because I had a little shop, just a little room in Syracuse. Sure. Then I moved to Warsaw, quit my full-time job. So I built it a year and a half, basically, with a full-time job, just going in after work and doing it.
Okay.
To where it literally took over
What
my
were some
full-time job.
Sure. What were some of the action steps that you took to kind of learn how to begin repairing cell phones and to kind of get into that?
I mean, again, it's simple. It's doing it, first-hand experience, and Google or YouTube. Like that's where I got it from. I didn't go to any class. I didn't go to any of that stuff. There wasn't much out there at that point anyway, unless you went to a company that was doing it. And I just went and did it. I mean, and I looked it up. If I came across something that I, wasn't sure of, I would look it up. And I'm very blessed in being able to figure things out and understand things quite a bit, even if I don't have education on that.
Kind of having that insight into what you're doing.
Yeah, and just kind of how things work, and like how it kind of, I don't know. It's definitely a gift, I would say, that I have. But yeah, and then just doing it, and I did mess a couple things up, but the one thing that I always did is if I messed something up, it was a hardware part, so I could always replace it, right? So that's why I also allow myself, like, yeah, it's fine, because will it cost me money? Yes, but that is part of my education. That is part of my growth.
Sure.
That's instead of paying $100,000 for college or whatever that is, this is my path, right? To get to, and I always had this dream of like, this is what I want it to look like. Well, it's kind of coming full circle now. It's pretty crazy. I started with, my main goals when I started that business, and before I started that business, was create a positive experience, because we have so much negative.
Sure.
So some kind of positive experience, and to change the customer experience and the employee experience. I've learned the employee experience with management and stuff is some people it comes easy. For me, because of things, it's a challenge, you know, and that's
Okay.
a place that I really spend time on growing myself now, is that.
Cool.
Um, but yeah, and that's where Creating Smiles came about. I mean, that my slogan for my business was there before my actual name for my business, because I was like,
Wow.
this is what I want it to be about. And you know, and then somebody said the lab, and that's kind of how it became, like it, you know, with creating and smiles and the lab and a beaker and technology, like it just kind of all. The first time I heard it, I was like, well, that's dumb.
Oh,
You know, but then like the more, and that's kind of how my mind operates, is like first I'll be like very against it maybe, but then I'll, you know, go home or whatever, or the next day I review it and kind of, and then it sticks or it doesn't, or like it or it doesn't.
Sure.
So,
Creating Smiles at the Lab.
yeah, you know, and that's how it became, and then it really, like now, you know, that's, people recognize us by that. That was, it's incredible, and people, I mean, the amount of feedback we get is just incredible. I mean, there's never anybody in our shop that says, oh, I wasn't sure if I should come here because of the negative things I heard. You know, you're always going to have a few negative here and there, just because it's people, it's technology, it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge that we undertake.
Absolutely.
Most shops that are in our industry are not on the level that we are, not even close, as far as one caring what they want, a good experience for the customer, but they don't go the extra length that we do, which I think comes back to the hardware experience, you know, a small town, taking care of people, solving people's issues, and then the quality.
So you're really making the customer experience, your customer experience stand out from the surrounding people or shops that do the same thing you do.
Yeah, you know, and or that's my goal, right?
Sure.
Like I said, like it's not every single time it happens, but 99% of the time, or 99.9, it does, right? You know, and it's as you get people, employees involved, and them to embrace that as much as you, is never going to fully happen as much, because one, if their personality is different, then the things that matter to them don't matter as much to me, right? So that's been a little bit of a challenge in that.
Okay.
I feel like I have a really good team now. They know what we want at the lab and what we're about. And we're people, so do we always achieve that 100%? No, but that's what we strive for.
Sure.
And I think that's the main, and giving them tools to work. You know, every week we have a 30-minute training. Sometimes it's mindset, it's, you know, how to deal with customers or this or that or whatever. But sometimes it's always, or it's just, you know, I mean, I try to spend more time on the mindset and teaching that side of things more than the actual repair side.
Okay.
Because repair side, I mean, that's mechanics, right? Software makes it a challenge because it's always updating and changing and stuff like that. So that's probably what makes it the most challenging on that. But if we are right over here, we can resolve this. You know, because it's over here that I feel like is our biggest obstacle, right? Over here is just figuring it out. Over here is
kind of the mindset. If you have the right mindset, you'll be able to deal with the issues that come up, is kind of where you're getting at.
Yeah.
Have you always felt like worthy of like owning a business or having a business? Like, where does your self-worth come from?
It's a very interesting and deep question. Worthy, I don't know. I would say worthy, yes. Sometimes what I get from the business, I don't, it's a little hard for me to accept that. Just the accolades and this and that's just a personal growth thing for me, right? It's not because I've always been I mean, growing up and how we were taught, like very humble and acknowledging what you've done or created is just not something that was part of my family's makeup, right? Like it wasn't. So with the last few years and where the business has gone, this year, a couple of mentors and a coach of mine really challenged me in that. And instead of saying, "Oh, I only have an eighth grade education," like, no, that's incredible, right? Like, I have an eighth grade education, and then I went and created this and this and this. And it's not like, "Oh, look what I've done," but it's more like anybody can do this, and it's awesome, right? And you can sit in that of like appreciation and gratitude of what it is and what you've created, and acknowledgement for a little bit, right? And just reprogramming my mind on that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So self-worth, I would say, yeah, but my mind does it in such a way that I don't see it as that until like we talk about it like this and get like deep into it.
Sure.
Right? So that's been a challenge that I've been given this year, and I see some growth in that. When people say, "Oh, good job," before I would, or "Great job, you're doing incredible," before I would just kind of like inside I would feel like,
Wow, that's
whatever.
About that, like being able to receive compliments.
Being able to receive compliments, right?
So how are you able to, are you pretty good at giving compliments?
No, I'm horrible. That's probably one of the worst things in my people management or people skills is giving compliments. Sure. And again, I don't think it's not something that intentionally I was not taught, brought it up or something like that. It's just how my family, like, we were all about showing it through action.
Sure.
It wasn't about words, and I think actions are a little more powerful than words.
They are, absolutely.
So I tried to do that because I'm really good at that, but I'm not good at words, affirmations, things like that. I have friends that have businesses, and at the end of the day, all their employees are, "Hey, good job," this and that. I have to force myself to do that, like consciously do that. Not that they didn't do a good job, because usually they do.
Right.
But I have to force myself to do that. So that is something that I'm aware of, and I've tried to grow, and I am growing in that, I would say. But I'm also aware that it is a big struggle for me. So doing what I'm good at, and then just working on these other little things and really showing that in other ways that, some people will receive it well, some people won't, and so I'm just different personalities, different experiences with life and stuff like that.
I find that incredible that you focused on your strengths rather than your weaknesses, and you use problem solving. Got an eighth grade education, and now you use that to grow to build what you've built. I think that's incredible.
I appreciate that. And just there, like that little comment at the end is things I've been working on. Before I'd just be like, yeah, but I wouldn't, like, inside I'd be like, there's a good feeling there, but there's also a feeling of almost guilt.
Oh wow, that's incredible.
And so now I'm purposely, after somebody does or says or acknowledges or whatever, I say something thankful, appreciative, something like that then takes my mind out of that guilt space. And like lets me actually like embrace that for a second.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's
Hell yeah.
incredible. When you do that, like it's really incredible. But the one thing I've learned, through life is we all have things that we struggle with, negatively affect us, and stuff like that. And it's not about, I used to be bitter about some of those things, with my upbringing and things like that. And it was And it's not about that, because you can never like change that or whatever. You can only like use that to help grow where you are currently and what you actually want
Kind of
currently.
use that for a catalyst for
Mhm.
the place that you want to go, rather than like dwelling back there and trying to.
Yeah, and hold that against those people,
Sure.
because, as I grow older, I realize more and more that like that's not my family's and my parents' goal. It was never that goal.
Sure.
It was just, we all have things that make up that we've experienced and stuff, and because of those things is how we treat others and have our own kind of so-called programming, right? And that's how we raise and treat people around us. So, yeah. And if your family is a good and they mean well, then give them a little bit of, and myself too, because I'm super hard on myself, and is give them a little bit of slack there.
Sure.
So,
I know for me in my life, forgiveness has been huge as far as being better towards what my parents may or may not have done, and realizing that they didn't know because, I mean, that's how they were taught.
Well, that's so fascinating, because you look at that and they're coming from like a way completely different time than what we're coming from. They grew up in a complete different environment.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, they have programs from that environment, but we're living in a different time now.
Right.
So like when they put those programs, I mean, they present them, but they don't always pertain to the now.
Right.
And it's so fascinating, because it's constantly like changing and evolving, and like the perceptions that we have right now, probably our kids are gonna like have the same similar outlook towards us, because like 20, 30 years in the future, the perception of them and the time they're living in is good. Like to right now, it's completely different.
Yeah, totally. And at the core, at the basics, and maybe that's not quite the right wording, but they have good values and morals and things like that we were taught. One thing I've seen, and that happens, is if there's negative things, it's generational usually, right? Because like I know the things that I really disliked, but then I find myself sometimes projecting that on to exactly how it was projected on me.
Wow, that's insightful.
And it's like, wait a minute, but that's your natural thing to do normally for most people, until you really work on that. And even then, it's sometimes really hard to break that cycle generationally. It really is. And that's, that I think is where I've really grown from. And that's why I greatly appreciate how I was brought up. I really do. Like, the world could kind of implode right now, and guess who is kind of set for that? Or in any situation, right? Like the way we were brought up it's incredible in that we can really tackle any situation, and we will be fine and better equipped than most people in the US, in other countries.
And why do you say that?
Because I looked at it as a struggle. I looked at it as, I wasn't allowed this, I wasn't allowed this.
Because like the lack of technology, is that kind of where you're getting at? Or?
Yeah, and the school I went to, I didn't have a lot of other Amish friends, so I saw what everybody else was doing and able to do, and whatever that is.
Okay.
And I wouldn't say that I struggled in far. I mean, we always had plenty of food, we always had all those things, right? But far as the mindset of like, why can't I go do this? I have to like go bale hay, right? So to me as a kid, that was a struggle. But I think I think there's such beauty in going through struggle or perceived struggle, because that's where you grow and that's where you expand, whether it's your knowledge or it's your mindset or whatever that is through that. If you just have a cush life, so-called, like you're never going to truly learn positive things from that. And that's, I mean, I don't know. I just really, as our society, and this is kind of my uh, perception and
Sure.
feeling on it. And a lot of people might disagree, but I think as our society, that we shouldn't just, our kids need to, and I don't have kids, so people say, I can't speak on this, but I really, from my experience, is that they shouldn't just be given everything. They should have to earn some of those things,
Absolutely.
because there's such, you learn in that. Kids learn in that. They don't learn in if you just give them an iPad and, just you can spend 10 hours on it. You have to do this to get an hour time on that. And, just the self-discipline, all these things, these little core things come from that is what I feel and see daily.
So growing up, do you feel like what you've been saying, is that kind of like the value of work and the reward following the work?
Yeah, the values, the morals of work, of self-discipline,
Sure.
of all these things. And a lot of my friends say, oh, you have such self-discipline. And I think a lot of it comes from that, right?
Sure.
I know it comes from that.
Sure.
Because in that religion, you have to be self-disciplined and stuff like that. Otherwise, you would get shunned because you would follow what you want to do, because it's all about, not, and you get to do some of those things you want to, but not allowing yourself to go, oh, I want a cell phone because I want to get on the internet, like I'm just going to go buy one. Like that's what everybody else does. Well, in that they don't, and it's self-discipline. It's all those little core things I think that really I appreciate now.
Sure.
So I look at it kind of so like feeding deer. If you don't feed deer, they're gonna go out and they're gonna find all their own food. They're gonna get their own nuts, eat the grass. But when you feed them and you continue to feed them, you put up food plots. They know there's always gonna be food there, and they come to these food plots. But then the fall comes around, and now there's a hunter by that food plot. And because they're so used to going here and getting the food, they don't even really have the perception that there's danger in doing that. And it's, I guess you could use the analogy of like food stamps, of feeding people. What happens when those food stamps are not there anymore? I feel like it's pretty important to, like you were saying, to have that kind of mindset of like you can like find the food on your own, find your own resources, create your own resources, and not depend on like an external like source or situation to provide that for you.
That's very powerful in everything we do, I think. Whether that is, in that instance, or, oh, I'm bored. So what do most people do nowadays when they're bored? You get on your phone, you get on your TV, you get on your tablet, stuff like that. And not that those things can't have their place, but I think it really takes away of your natural ability. You don't, again, that's a muscle. So when you don't continually work those things, then say 5 years down the road, like everything disappears. How are you going to be able to deal with, just with that one thing, the boredom? Like,
Sure.
How can you deal with that?
So I have something to add to that. I feel like boredom doesn't even exist, and we create boredom. If someone says that they're bored, it's because they want to be bored, rather than doing something that'll benefit them, or even if there's nothing to do, sit and meditate, and that will benefit you. You're not bored, you're being. You're like being a human.
I totally agree there. And I, being in the technology field and stuff, I see how it benefits us, but I also see how much of a detriment it is. with just it, like the deer analogy. It takes away our instinct and makes that very dull,
like docile.
right? So we
Yeah.
don't, when you don't use that, it's, and the word is boredom, but I totally agree. Like there's so much, like when they don't have anything, like we're always fascinated by what they can come up with, right? That creativity.
Sure.
We all have that.
Sure.
We have just become dull or docile in that because of all the things that have constantly
Grab their attention.
Grab our
It's
attention.
essentially distractions is what it is.
Yeah. So, I can sit here all day.
I really appreciate you spending your time this morning and coming
Sure.
onto the podcast. Is there any final thoughts that you have for or anything you want to share before we wrap this podcast up?
I don't know. I think the one thing that I've really been like, it's been on my mind anytime I come to a podcast or anything, talk about this kind of stuff is just I would encourage everybody to really just do something every day that's uncomfortable. Just one thing that's uncomfortable. And in that, it doesn't have to be this big thing, right? Like, say, I don't know, I don't want to make a cup of coffee but I really like coffee, but I don't want to make it because it's, I'm going to have to do these steps. Like, well, just do that. Just something very simple. It doesn't have to be huge. Just do something every day that makes you uncomfortable or pushes against what you want to do after you think about it.
Kind of like using your will like a hammer and smashing
just
those.
Push through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just push through something.
Like thoughts will come up, but with your will, you're able to overpower or overcome those thoughts.
Yeah. And when you do that every day, the beautiful thing about that is you'll develop a habit, not just for those things, but you'll develop a habit of you being able to really do anything then without having, we always have thoughts, but without having that big amount. And so just do something every day to push yourself, to challenge yourself. And that's it.
Would you like to share your social media or what are
Sure.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll share the business, and then if you want to, you can find my personal through the business, but it's thelabrepair.com, the Lab Repair on Instagram, on Facebook. But basically, we're a repair shop, and we do all kinds of repair. We focus on electronics, but we do any kind of repair.
And if you're in the Michiana area, you guys are located in.
We're located in downtown Warsaw. So if we have people as far as LaGrange drive to us, which is an hour and a half away. South Bend, and then we have a online, you can send stuff in. So we have people from all over the U.S. send us stuff. Not a lot yet, but like almost every week we get at least one thing sent to us. So,
Cool.
which is super cool.
You can add my Snapchat at neilman25. It's all lowercase.
And mine is ex-Amishpreneur.
Peace.
Love that.
Peace.